we're just going to start this off diving right in to discussing the current situation which the Los Angeles area, Malibu Palisades are dealing with. As everyone knows, I believe currently we have over 24,000 acres of burnt and destroyed area in Malibu, Palisades, and Brentwood. Now, these, I believe, up to 30,000 residents have been dislocated from this. Now, this fire is impacting everything, not just this Los Angeles area. I believe it's affecting as far south as San Diego currently. I think we were talking a little bit more. Orange County is getting a lot of the smoke and the ash runoff from there. Maybe we can all just talk about sort of what our thoughts are initially discussing these wildfires and possible risks that are going to come from them. And Michael, I'd like to start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. It's important to look at these type of incidents and tragic incidents and from a phased approach to first and foremost protect human life. Certainly that is occurring and it is ongoing. The fires have subsided substantially, but what that is left behind is just now the result of the fire. And that's where we're going to focus much of our attention to. What happens next? Now that the fires are for the most part out, there's still spot fires being treated and so forth. Keep that as the case. But what about the homes that burnt down? What's left behind? What are the hazards associated with that? What are the impacts? And also, very importantly, too, yes, the homes were devastated, homes were destroyed. What about the many, many more times that amount of homes which have been impacted through the smoke intrusion, which had occurred, whether they were in the path of the plume or they're going to be impacted by some of the restoration activities, the soot, the ash removal that's occurring following these fires, and very importantly, what are the contaminants of concern relative to the smoke damaged homes, what residents need to look for and to do in order to mitigate those damages.
That's a great, perfect. That sort of takes us right into it. So, dealing with these fires, what are some of the things that the community can do? I guess let's start with basics. How long? Now I know we're right now. I believe I checked this morning. Where with the Palisades fire, I believe it's only 50% contained, roughly.
Mhm.
So again, this is still a active fire. How long post-fire evacuation, we'll say, do people need to be concerned with this?
I'll interject and then turn it to the panelists as well too. Days, weeks, months, if not longer. Because what's going to be having to be accounted for are the residues and the contaminants that have been left behind following the fires. So whether that was the actual destruction of the materials, the ashes from the buildings themselves, and the contaminants that will be present in those, which we'll go over in any detail that you'd like here, but also importantly, the smoke residues that have infiltrated the homes that were in the path of the smoke plume.
Gotcha.
So that those impacts can impact the health of people currently, from just the breathing of the particulates in the air. Yourself, Joel, you have mentioned to me as well too that it's hard to breathe in certain places, difficult to exercise, and these are considerations that are going to diminish over time, yes, but they're significant now, and until we have the appropriate climatic conditions where rains and so forth, which knock down those particulates in the air, and then these contaminants have been removed. They're gonna be there until they're either removed or Mother Nature actually helps mitigate those.
Move everything through. Now,
Um,
my question, so with this and with the current state, and I'm just going to ask from a personal, as people are walking around in Los Angeles currently, people who are in the surrounding areas, what protocol or PPE should we as Los Angelinos be aware of, be putting into play to protect ourselves from these contaminants, from these particles? Now, because when I look at I Google, air quality, which I'm sure many people in Los Angeles are doing, air quality in Los Angeles. You get, air.net and it says, moderate. What does that mean exactly for layman's who and Rania, let's we'll move to you, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And so, wildfire, I mean, the fires are just like Michael just said, are not going to go away. Just, there's a lot of people that are currently exposed to it. And also, there's going to be smoldering fires as people are moving, into recently burned areas or checking on properties. And so, I think it's important that folks be checking the air quality index. That shows up on your weather map, and it can tell people, it gives a rating as to what the air quality is and then what kind of protection folks need. However, what I want to also another app that's very useful that gives further detail is the Air Now or AirGov app. It will break down the air quality index and say what it's based on, because see, the air quality index is really based on two parameters, which is ozone in the air and particulate matter, 2.5, which are particles smaller than 2.5. However, that air quality index, and you can get further details about that on AirGov app, does not take into account other contaminants that are in the air. And as many of our panelists today will say, there's so many more. It is not just particulate matter we want to worry about. However, we do want to worry about particulate matter, both in the current fires and also as, ash will be stirred up when in the cleanup happening or people entering their homes. And so, I'd be happy to talk about particulate matter. It is, there's short-term and long-term health effects of it. But people have different vulnerabilities to it. And I think one concept that is important to share, and I have a slide, if I may share about that. Let me go to that. And I think that's just a concept that I think would be worthy of introducing right now. As before we get into any particular exposures, I'm sorry, I'm just going to pop that one slide that I wanted to show folks. And that is that whether it's smoke or whatever it is that our panelists will be talking about later today, the risk is that whether people are going to be harmed by something or not is very dependent on the nature of the hazard, and then if people are exposed to it or not. And so risk, the probability that harm may occur to anyone, whether it's an adult or a child or a pet in the household or people entering areas, that harm may occur if one gets in contact with a hazard. And that hazard could be the contaminant in the air, such as wildfire, smoke, or the fire smoke. However, many of our folks today are going to talk about deposits in the home of certain substances, and those are hazards and could cause harm to folks, but only if exposure occurs, because exposure is when someone gets in contact with the hazard, whether through inhaling it or ingesting it or getting it on the skin. So without exposure, including fire and including smoke, which a lot of people in the public are now concerned about, without that exposure, there is no risk. And with all that said, vulnerability plays a large role because, depending on one's age, how active we are outside, are we cleaning up or just we walking through, will depend how much air we're taking in, any underlying health conditions, any other things we're being exposed to. So again, going to the fire and the particulates, from later people going into the home or currently the fires, people want to consider that air quality index certainly says a lot about the general regional pollution level in the area, particularly with particular PM 2.5. However, you may be standing in a local hotspot where your exposures may be higher than that. And, protection includes, limiting one's exposure, being in areas where there is an HVAC system with filters in place in the system, or wearing personal protective equipment such as N95 masks. And we can get into more of that if you would like.
Yeah, that's actually, I'd love to delve a little bit more into what people can currently be doing to protect themselves from this. Because again, I think a lot of people, and I see this personally, I walk my dog regularly through the neighborhood, and there's a number of people who, even though there's a heavy layer of haze to the city, there's a number of people who aren't taking these precautions. And so what would be an adequate precaution, and what are some of the side effects that could come from lack of precaution? And I know that would be obviously taking you back to your chart, but if you wouldn't mind giving me sort of a bare minimum versus an extreme, giving us sort of a range of where someone who is healthy should versus somebody who has pre-existing respiratory issues.
Well, that's a really good question. I am not gonna go into quantifying the level of risk because there's so many factors that go into that. However, what I'll do is maybe show, just for the sake of, again, laying the stage for what so many other panels will talk more about, in terms of how might you clean this up and things like that. What do I want to share? Let me share a list. Okay, let's start with a list. And then, maybe not to say that we'll dig into it, but, we talked about fire, right? And smoke. And that is just the particulate matter in it. And I'll talk right after this about what is the minimum level of protection. It's not, unfortunately, smoke coming from an urban setting is not just trees and leaves burning. It's a lot more than that. And so, this is a slide that content came from the EPA, and they did a study where they estimated pollutant emissions from fires in the wildland urban interface. So it wasn't just burning trees, but it's burning cars and structures. And some of the pollutants that they found are, there's metals in the air, lead, cadmium, arsenic, there's gases, hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen chloride, naphthalene, there's dioxins and furans. And so the health effects of these are way more than just a respiratory health effect. You've got things that interrupt the endocrine system. You've got carcinogens. If we talked just about metals, you've got lead, which can impact the central nervous system, particularly in developing children, or even a developing child, a baby in the fetus in the womb of a mother. And then there's, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons as a result of a fire that, if inhaled or if coating a particle that people inhale, are carcinogens. And then you've got organic compounds in the air, and some things will deposit on surfaces and some things are volatile. So the level of protection, and I do want to add, and I'm sorry I did not add to the slide, asbestos is a very important one, and that should be added to the slide, and I apologize for not listing it. I was just throwing things together for this. And so, I didn't invent this, I'm not going to go over this study, but I do want to say, and that's the same study I was referring to, the orders of magnitude of what some of these compounds that I listed would be in a fire that comes of an urban setting, or if you look in the areas of red, like 3,000 times more, 126,000 times more, 36,000 times more. Dioxins, which are known to, build up in the environment. You really don't want them depositing on things and staying, and you don't want to inhale them. They build up in the food chain, 10,000 more. So anyway, cadmium, lead, the gray area is these are levels that are really high. And so what one would want to protect themselves is a big question. I would say that, let's begin with N95 respirators. I think that would be a minimum level of protection if the fire is still active or there's ash that's being stirred up and people are just walking onto the property, which is the beginning. They haven't yet entered their home. And I know that our panelists will speak a lot more about, what could be inside the home and what do we do about that. And so, wearing an N95 respirator, and I'm, giving a picture of it here. And those are the respirators where the bands go over the head, not the things that go over the ears. It is not a bandana. It is not a surgical mask. It is not a cloth that covers the face. N95s, or, KN95s are made to fit people better and really filter out 95% of small particulates, can, mitigate those short-term health effects from particulate matter. And we've seen that evidence in studies. Mind you, none of them are approved for children. However, of course, any cover is better than none. And, it can impact somebody who has already some lung conditions. It's hard to breathe through these sometimes. And, COVID is a perfect example of these, using these KN95s. People have them, people can use them. And that would be maybe the minimum level of protection, I would say, as people walk into still smoldering fires or beginning to stir up ash. However, the first bullet point, it is important to know that volatile organic compounds, and I listed some of these earlier, will not be filtered by that mask. And so one would need, a filter like a respirator with a combination cartridge filter that filters VOCs and gases and particulates. That would be helpful.
Excellent.
So, yeah, I mean, there's so many other PPEs we could use depending on what people are doing. And, I don't want to, monopolize the talk, but I'd be happy to go over health effects if you
No,
choose.
this is excellent, and what a great start, Rania. Thank you very much. That really sets the groundwork. I think I'd like to actually pose that same question to Rob, if you don't mind. Rob, same question. What are some things we as a public can be doing to protect ourselves currently in the situation that we find ourselves in?
Sure, and I'm not going to go into the depth that Rania went into, but I am going to kind of circle back to something that Michael said. It depends. In determining the risk of your health as you find yourself in these environments, a lot of it depends on your age, your state of health, where you are. Are you downwind of the plume? Are things actively smoldering or are things subsided? So things are going to change with time. And it's kind of up to an individual to figure out, where their comfort level is. I agree with Rania that, N95s and even surgical masks are going to provide some degree of protection to a normal, healthy person walking out where there still may be particulate. However, again, from a risk perspective, it also depends the activity are you doing. Are you walking your dog? Are you exercising? Are you actively cleaning up soot and ash inside your home? All these situations are going to have a different potential for exposure to these hazardous compounds and the amount of dust in the air. So, the more exposure that you have, the higher degree of protection you need. And the more vulnerable you are, the higher degree of protection you need, or move yourself into an area where you don't need as much protection. So again, it's kind of being an individual call because everyone's situation is going to be different.
Yeah, beautiful. And that sort of takes me into my next question, is who is at risk in this situation, and what level. So, and you sort of touched on that a little bit, Rob, depending on what their activity level, where the plume is sort of settled, or what other variables, we'll say, should we be looking out for as this fire continues?
Well, great question. Again, it depends on an individual situation. If you're just worried about the atmospheric conditions, then again, it's the minimum level of an N95 or equivalent. If you're doing active cleanup, that's a whole different ballgame. So again, it varies.
Okay.
I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all answer with this.
Yeah.
As time goes by, things will settle out. I mean, for people who are re-entering their homes that have been damaged by smoke, the first visual clues: do you smell something? Do you see something? Do you see soot and ash? At that point, perhaps instead of cleaning it yourself, you may want to get a professional service to come in and do it. People who are trained to wear heavier levels of personal protective equipment, like the cartridge respirators that Ronnie had mentioned.
Gotcha. Because in cleaning up, in stirring up all of this dust, all of this settled soot ash, that gives a way to a whole different level of exposure, correct?
Absolutely. Because you're dealing with a more higher concentration of chemical, decomposition products, and it's right there in your breathing zone, as you're washing and wiping and mopping and so forth. Um, and it's typically the cleanup crews who have the highest potential exposure compared to the general public. So
Amazing. Now, I'll pose this up for everyone. So, how long do these chemicals, so everyone, let's say everybody can go back to their homes, how long do these chemicals settle? Is there a half-life for these? And how long would that be? What would be the next step for a lot of these people? So let's say I'm out of my home. I've just gotten the A-OK to go back in. What are my next steps? And is that going back in, like what you said, Rob, going back in, just listening, smelling? What, from you guys' perspective, how long does this last, and what are my next steps when I go back to my home?
I'll
Mike?
address I'll address quickly how long it lasts. The simplest answer to that question as to how long it lasts, it depends on what the compound is. Some compounds will degrade quickly, just ambiently, through the natural degradation and oxidation. Others, like heavy metals, asbestos, and so forth, they will remain. Many of the volatiles, the gases that were present during the fire and are emitted through the smoldering smoke, those are going to be emitted and they're going to travel and go away. So, the answer to your question is some will remain and some will just naturally degrade over a short period of time, days. The gases like the benzenes, the formaldehydes, and so forth, that's being emitted, and the very highly toxic substances, that's being emitted during the fire itself, when it's actually the fire is burning or it's smoldering. Um, dissipates very quickly afterwards. Someone like John Scheibstead, his teams have really good experience as to what they wear during cleanups as well too. So maybe he could give a description as to what's the other extreme when you're actually doing the cleanup. How
I
are
love
you
that.
protected?
Beautiful. Micah, thank you for that. Yeah, John, so tell us, and maybe you can walk, for those of you or those of us who don't know exactly what it is your teams do, maybe you could give a brief overview of what your team does when they come in, and yeah, what safety precautions are are standard for them going into a situation such as this?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, safety is huge. And what's unique about this fire, unlike other brush fires, is the old other brush fires a lot of times are just ordinary combustibles burning. Your wood, your brush. You smell that in the air, but you smell something different in this fire. It's because so many thousands of homes have burned, all these plastics and stuff. So that's where this is really concerning to us and for all the residents that are in the area where the winds are blowing. So as far as how we protect our crews, it really depends how close you are to the burn area and burnt homes. And the closer you get, you see that those particulates in the air, and you smell that burnt plastic. We always use a combo filter, so that's a P100 particulate filter with a VOC filter. So it's filtering out the VOC. So respiratory protection is key. Obviously we wear particulate suits and all that kind of stuff, boots, rubber boots and stuff, but the real thing, you got to protect your lungs. And one thing we're seeing out in the field, you got all these gardeners and they're out there cleaning up and they're using their blowers and they're just kicking up all these particulates in the air. And that's not what we want to do. So you want to keep that on the ground. We got to wait till Mother Nature comes in and, the rain hits to keep all those particulates on the ground. But right now, the wind's blowing and those particulates are going all over. So you want to wear some type of mask. And when you're doing the cleanup, obviously, if it's very contaminated, I recommend the VOC combo filters. You can get that at your local, like Home Depot, your department or hardware store.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so that actually takes me to my next question, and I'll field this for the whole team. So what are some of these short term? Obviously, there's a ton, as you said, John, the dry air, all the dust, it's all stirred up. And until Mother Nature comes in and sort of settles everything, it's all just going to be stirred up. So what are some of the short-term effects versus some of the long-term effects that we should be aware of moving forward in this current situation? And we'll go, let's actually go with, let's go with Jen. Jen, would you like to chime in?
Actually, I think the other people on the panel would be way more qualified to answer this particular question.
Okay, perfect.
But I do want to comment in our community, I think, and Rob alluded to this a bit, when you asked how long before we can come back and how long do these last and what steps do we take, it's really about the space that you can control. Right. And so when your home's cleaned properly, you can actually control that space and you can have the filters and you can have the air quality on your home actually. And in our community, we found that once the proper remediation was done, that people could come home, but then kids weren't allowed to play outside because the debris hadn't been cleaned up. And once the debris was cleaned up, then we were able to monitor the air quality in the area through that process to see whether we were allowed to be outside or not, and whether we wanted to be in our yards that were affected. And these things that we had cleaned out of our houses are now in the grass and trees. So we really didn't let the kids play outside for like a year, a cycle of seasons to really get this kind of organically get this stuff gone. And then when the construction started, there was another level of watching air quality because the construction starts turning everything up as well. And so I think it's really important to, I know people want to go home and they want to just like clean it up and get in there and be back home. And I think the biggest thing is for people to slow down as much as possible. And it's not a normal thing to do when you have fire brain and you can't remember information and all this technical stuff is coming at you. But there are some things that you can control, but there really is no safe way to bring your family, back into these spaces unless you've had an industrial hygienist report and what toxins are in the space or not. And so it alarms me that people want to just go in and clean it up themselves. We had a restoration company come and do what we thought was all the proper cleanup. They cleaned out vents, airways, systems, cleaned carpets, replaced insulation, power washed the house and adjacent area, and we moved back in and we all got sick because that wasn't enough. That wasn't, and that's a restoration company. They have a whole crew that comes and wipes everything down in your whole house. And the industrial hygienist report came after that, where we saw that all these toxins are in things that can't be cleaned, right? And so, I'm just very much want people to know that, like, if you need to go in and grab things, like, mask up, PPE, all that is great. Careful what you're taking out of the contaminated area, and but the proper way to address this is really like there's a way to clean up these toxins, and it isn't just like wipe it off the wall. And I'm really worried that people either won't have the resources to address these things properly, or they'll feel like they can go in and just clean it up. And so just all of this is helpful in terms of the, how long do these things last, and how can these contaminants affect you? But I think a lot of education has to come for the community and large on how can you really properly clean these up, because most people can't do it on their own.
Yeah. So it sounds like, and I'm coming to you next, but it sounds like this is and I think a lot of the public needs to know this is a multi-staged move back into normal life. This is not a dive in. This is not suddenly we can just move past it. This is a step by step to do this safely and correctly, so that way we can inhibit the short-term and long-term health effects, which I'm going to bring right back up to you, Rania. If you could actually go into a description of what some of these things that long and short term we should be aware of, and some of the risks of some of this.
Okay. Yeah. So for short-term health effects, let's talk about particulate matter first, and I'll address very broadly the other compounds. I think right now, the smoke is an issue. It won't necessarily stay that way for a long time, but since it is an immediate concern, let me share this. that small particles, which are PM 2.5s and they're product of a combustion usually, I mean, they are produced by combustion, such as these fires, short-term exposure to them will worsen respiratory disease if one already has it. Things like asthma and COPD, which could lead to hospitalization, emergency department visits, and in children are way more susceptible to this than adults. And the reason is that children breathe a lot more air per gram of their body weight than adults do. They breathe more actively, so they breathe more per minute than adults do. I don't know if you've ever put your hand on the chest of a baby or a child and they move, you know, they breathe very heavily, and that's just normal for them. So the point is that they take in a lot more air relative to their body size than an adult. And that really is about any pollutant that we're talking about that's in the air. And also, you know, their systems haven't developed as well. So their clearance mechanisms and other mechanisms in the respiratory system, other parts of the body aren't as well, aren't grown enough yet or developed enough to deal with whatever we're exposing them to, including what they inhale. And then, you know, so short-term exposures would be particulate matter, I think, the most. And then if, you know, long-term exposure to particulate matter is other things. You know, studies have shown it could have chronic heart, people can have chronic heart, you know, affect their heart disease, cardiovascular, in children and adolescents, reduced lung function, and so on. So that's like an immediate concern. But then if we talk about what are folks inhaling, if they're inhaling dust because ash is being stirred up, then you've got metals, lead, for example. You may not see the health effects immediately unless the dose is very high, but over the long term, it will, you know, affect the IQ of a child. It would reduce the development and of their central nervous system and their brain, and that's non-reversible. And things like lead, you know, it takes about 30 years for them to clear out of the bones, which is where they deposit in the body. So you want to not only protect children now from ash or, you know, smoke, but you also, as you got to clean it up in the home where it has settled too, because that will be long-term exposures. And so metals like lead and, you know, arsenic and cadmium, they have long-term health effects, mostly on the central nervous system. And then, you know, VOCs or organics that have settled and that will settle on objects like toys, or could be, you know, present right now in the ash that is outside a home. As you go into a home, those have much further and deeper health effects that accumulate over time. And that's why, you know, how much one gets exposed to, how often, how frequently, the dose, the amount that happens, you know, it could cause cancer. They've been associated, you know, dioxins and furans with cancers and hormonal dysfunction or endocrine disruption and disruption of immune system. So you really want to decrease exposure, really at all. Yes, there, you know, things in the air that are now more of a hazard that are fine, but that hazard will remain as people stir up ash. And so I would like to mention what could people do right now as they walk onto their property. I really would like to leave it to others on the panel to talk about what do they do when they go inside the house and clean it up.
Yep.
But I will cover that first level of what would they do if they did go inside the home to protect themselves. And yes, for sure, we spoke of N95 respirators. Mind you, they really need to be, you know, fitted to the person. They've got to fit tight around the nose. You know, if one has facial hair, the mask is not going to fit as well. So things, you know, just wearing a respirator is not enough. It needs to fit the person well, and, you know, maybe apply, you know, your hands on the seal and see, you know, if you blow out, does air come out of the seams of it, or is it pretty well contained? You might have to tighten the straps. What I do want to say too is that folks need to watch what they're wearing, what they have on their feet, their clothes. One needs to be wearing long pants, long sleeves, because there's, hazards, pieces of wood, metal poking around. There's people opportunity to cut themselves, so wearing gloves, depending on it is what they're doing. Really don't stir up the ash. No dry sweeping. No leaf blowers, as was already mentioned. That is absolutely a no-no, whether it's, inside the home or outside the home. I'll speak of the first level of, if one had to vacuum inside a home, definitely using a vacuum with a HEPA filter, because otherwise you're just resuspending whatever you're vacuuming out into the air and actually causing further harm by people are going to breathe it more. And so I guess these are sort of the first, gloves, maybe goggles or safety glasses for sure, because, ash will go into the eyes, but also other things could fly into the eyes. There's other things in the smolder, in the leftover of a fire. You've got lead acid batteries that have melted. I look around my place, I don't even know how many lead acid batteries I have. In every remote control, whatever. And so those have probably melted in the fire, and you've got acid. So people need to protect their hands. But then you've got lithium ion batteries. I mean, actually, some of them might explode soon after a fire. Those things will contain the heat in their casing for quite a few days. And it's been a firefighting challenge because you can't stop that fire with water. You kind of have to let it burn. And in fact, there's something in the news right now about a lithium ion battery burning right now up in the Bay Area, and they're letting it burn. You can't extinguish that. So, these are immediate hazards. And I'd like to turn it over to other folks about, what are some additional health effects that could happen from long-term exposure to substances inside the home, and what do we do about that?
Yeah, let's actually go let's see. Let's go to Michael. Michael, what are your thoughts? Long-term exposure, health risks, and then I'd like to actually we'll segue into thank you for that segue into the cleaning once we return to our homes.
Yeah,
Best
I,
to
I think
start
I think suffice
externally.
Yeah, suffice to say that uh, the residues, the smoke, the ash, the char, and so forth. It's a mixture of many, many compounds, and so many of them are very toxic, and different toxicities associated with them as to how they affect our bodies. None of these effects are necessarily good for you. That's for sure. So minimization, taking the precautionary principle is appropriate here. So minimize those exposures, as was mentioned, through respiratory protection, dermal protection, skin protection. Do not ingest it. Wear goggles so that your mucous membranes are not impacted, from the airborne particulates and the chemicals as well too. So yes, with that, it's important to minimize those exposures to all of these different toxins. When you go inside the house, it's going to be a matter of quickly evaluating, what are our goals here? Is your goal to, get back into your house quickly? Uh, but let's not forget, the safety of your health and safety for yourself and your family when you get back into these homes. So considerations that should be made are how adversely impacted your house has been to the smoke. Let's say that the house is still standing. The only way to really evaluate that is through sampling, or you could just assume everything is contaminated. And there needs to be a visual assessment that's performed. Do you see residues on surfaces? Do you see trails? Do you see smoke webs in the corners of your in still spaces in your house? Do you see the trails coming in through the weep holes from windows and doors and so forth? If those are present, then there's going to be soot, char, and ash, which are the three primary indicators of combustible, complete combustion and incomplete combustion that come into a house. And those will contain the heavy metals. Those will contain other chlorides and different anions that are associated with the degradation of what burned in the fire. Those need to be cleaned up. And quickly, what I would suggest is that the property owner assesses their comfort level relative to this. Number one, do they does it smell smoky inside the house? Do they see visual indicators of this damage? And are they willing to clean it up themselves and to assume the risks associated with that? And there are methods that we can go over that could get them in the right direction, or to hire a mitigation company, to do this. And is that going to be paid for? As Jen Koch absolutely knows, that is a huge part of this whole process. It's a multifaceted process. Getting your insurance company involved and what they're willing to do and what they need to do in order to, make this situation right, to mitigate the damages associated with this. So if it's a matter of, minimizing exposure, yes, absolutely. You want to minimize that with protecting yourself, limit your activities within your house, and then make that determination. Is this going to be an insurance claim? Are you going to pursue that avenue? Or some people may not have the means. They may not have insurance on their homes. And then it's a matter of them cleaning it up themselves. So there's pros and cons with either of those, and there's the right way and the wrong way to do it as well.
On that note, I wanted to sort of bring up something that I currently am dealing with, and I talked with John a little bit about this earlier. For a lot of us who have been affected by this fire, I think there's a level of nose blind that is currently going on. We've been dealing with a level of smoke and toxicity in the air for going on 10 days, almost 2 weeks now. I noticed it yesterday. I was down in Palos Verdes, and as I came back up, I finally could smell that. I was like, wow, it's still going.
Yeah.
What would you guys suggest, or is there something in particular that homeowners, when they go back, because I think a lot of people will be afflicted by that same ailment, we'll say, because it's all we've been smelling for the past 10 days. Is it
Yeah.
just safe to assume that everything is covered in a toxic film?
Yeah. Yes, if you can see it, that's the case. If you're in the smoke impacted zone, that will be the case. What you've described, Joel, is olfactory desensitization, and that's a normal occurrence where your smell, when you walk into an area for the first time, you will smell it more readily than if you've been there and you've been desensitized to that over a period of time. That's a normal occurrence, and everybody's sensitivities are different. Some people will smell something at a certain level where it will take 10 times, 100 times that much of that level for another person to smell it. So what you're describing is normal. But what we're getting at is if you're in the impacted area and the residues are present and the homes have been burned and destroyed in that area, it is reasonable to assume that there's going to be some form of deposition within and on your property.
Okay, excellent. So I think that's going to take me to my next. All right, indoor versus outdoor cleaning priorities. So we're moving back in. I'm just going to set the stage for everybody. We're free to go back to our homes, but we're dealing with fire damage on the outside, fire damage on the inside. Where do we begin to start the cleanup? Do we start on the inside? Do we start on the outside? Is there a preference? I'll take this. I should go to Rob. Or John, do you guys want to? Do you guys have thoughts on this? There you go. I think I saw a finger. John, the finger is to you, my man. Any thoughts on this matter? We'll go. Let's see, Rob. I think there we go. We'll go back to John. And Rob,
about that. I'm trying to switch these cameras, and it's not going as easy as I thought. But
no worries. There it is.
as far as outside versus inside, really, I mean, right now there's so much soot and ash all around the outside. I mean, the priority is the inside. But I would recommend, we want to hose down the outside so it doesn't get into the house. But really, we got to focus on the inside. And one of the things that I find, like some pro tips, when we're cleaning the inside, we got to remove those toxins. And what I see people do is they get a rag or something wet, and you have your porous, you have your non-porous items. So your non-porous would be your countertops, floors, like when I say floors, like tile floors. Then you have your porous items, which would be your furniture and clothes and even your drywall and walls. And what happens is you have somebody take their wet rag and they start wiping everything down, and you're actually sometimes pushing those contaminants into those porous items. So again, Rob or Michael, chime in on this. I put you guys on mute, so you have to unmute yourself. But what we do is we like to HEPA vacuum everything first and remove those particulates from the walls before we do any type of wet cleaning process, so that we're not pushing those contaminants deeper into the sofa or the walls. Again, we talked about the HEPA filters. That's important. You don't want to just use your normal vacuum filter. You really got to get a HEPA filter. They sell those again at your local hardware store, the Home Depots and stuff. So get a vacuum with a HEPA filter.
And that is a specialized, sorry to interrupt, but that is a specialized, just for anyone watching, a specialized vacuum. That's not our traditional Dyson. That is a specialized HEPA approved vacuum, correct?
So they have HEPA filters, and depending on your vacuum, they do sell HEPA filters for those vacuums.
Good to
But you
know.
can pick up these vacuums, $150 or so at Home Depot, and you get the HEPA filter. It's an upgraded filter. It doesn't come with the HEPA filter, but that's something you can buy at these local hardware stores, and then just go on Amazon or something and check with your vacuum that you currently have to see if they have a bag that will fit. That's a HEPA bag for the current vacuum that you have.
And that's good to know, because I think a lot of people are going in thinking, exactly what you initially said. They're going in, they're going to go Windex and vacuum with the illusion that that's going to be cleaning up fully. But again, the specialization of the HEPA filter for their vacuum, and it's great information to know, because I did not know that they actually make HEPA vacuum or filters for traditional vacuums. So
Yes.
great information out there.
And another point, a lot of times you'll have this soot and ash or whatever fall onto like inside a house, and you'll see it all over your picture frames and stuff. Again, you don't want to get that wet. They sell a thing, it's called a dry chem sponge. Again, you can find that on Amazon or your local janitor supply store, and that's really good. It removes the soot from those photos, those things that you can't get wet without damaging them.
Excellent. And what we'll do is we'll put a link to HEPA filters and a dry chem sponge actually in the bottom of the
Sure.
chat whenever we post this on YouTube for the audience, so that way they have a actual a link to go to that location. Let's see. So again, we're moving in. Priority is utilizing proper proper tools to do the job when they come back into their homes, their neighborhoods. I think that's really important, because a lot of people are going to go in, and I think that the general idea is we can just go in and start cleaning. Because I think, Jen, you touched on it, firebrain. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out what's next. They're overwhelmed with life and insurance and what's next for them. So this is something really interesting that I think we should touch on. Now, in professional opinions, should homeowners be doing their cleanup, or is that dependent on the level of effect from the fires? And we'll start with Rob.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, like I said earlier, every situation is different. If homeowners or small business owners do attempt to clean it up themselves, they really need to go and take some precautions just at the beginning. Make sure that you have the appropriate PPE. Look at the degree of contamination. Is there a smell? Because even with a diminished sense of smell, if you smell something, it's probably pretty significant contamination, and it's something that you may want to punt to a professional to deal with. When in doubt, get an assessment, done by a certified industrial hygienist or other people who have, experience with smoke damage. And even if you have to come out of pocket, which is really difficult for a lot of people, it'll give you a better idea of what you can do yourself versus what you should try and get a professional to do. Because, even though everyone is anxious to get home, we don't want people to harm themselves in trying to do the cleanup work themselves. So if you're doing cleanup work and you start getting headaches or runny eyes, or you start coughing, that's your body telling you to stop. You're dealing with something that's dangerous. And you don't want to endanger yourself or your family to try and save some heirlooms.
Absolutely.
We're all attached to our stuff, but it's not worth your health.
Stuff can be. I'm a Floridian at heart, so we deal with hurricanes down there. Stuff can always be rebought. We're dealing with that currently. Jen, same question. I think we had, I think you had some thoughts on there. What are your thoughts on professional versus not? Rob brought up some really interesting or really great bullet points with that. But would you agree with go in, check it out, give yourself these smell tests? Or because I know you've dealt with you've actually worked with a number of people who have dealt with this. So what is your experience in this?
I do want to say that just because you can't smell anything doesn't mean it's not there. And I think sometimes people come in their house that has smoke damage and they look around and they say, everything looks okay, I can't smell anything. And they don't realize that there are a lot of these airborne toxins that can be on things that you can't tell that they're there, even after they're, wet, cleaned and things like that. I do want to say, if the ability is there, I know there will be some people that are not insured, and it's a very tough situation to hire somebody for thousands of dollars to come in to assess a space that may or may not have any damage. But I do want to say, typically in a fire recovery, and I expect even more at the magnitude of what this is, there will be funds later that come for reimbursing things like this. People who are not insured will qualify under a category that will likely be labeled unmet needs, or this is going to be money that's there for helping with rent and helping with replacing items and helping with covering some of the costs for things like this. And so I expect if there are a lot of folks not insured, there's going to be some money that comes later. So if the decision point now is, I can't spend this now because it will make or break me down the road, I just like people to know that there's money that's going to come that isn't available yet, but it will be there to cover things like this. So if you're able to make the decision to get a professional to at least assess it, and then you can take on some of the cleanup, you can decide then, what are you going to pay for? Or what are you going to try to do yourself? But without the baseline of the testing, you have no idea what you're working with. And so I think it's a tough thing. Most people have never even heard of an industrial hygienist until this happens. And so I remember in our community, a lot of questions of like, do I really need to do this? And I was one of the people that was like, that seems very extra. My house is clearly damaged. The restoration company will come, and I didn't understand. And then later, it came that now I'm a huge proponent of like, this is, if you pay for anything, get this one thing so that you're informed properly. And then later, because of it, you may qualify for funds from various, resources. There's going to be federal funds, there's going to be state funds, there's going to be donations that people made to the community foundation, in LA, and various groups. Or this is a great thing for people to do a GoFundMe for people and say, I don't want to move my kids back into a space that I don't know is safe. And I need to get this industrial hygienist report, and it's going to be this amount of money, and this is my goal. I'd love you want to help me? Help me this way. This will be a great way to help.
Well, and I think that's such an excellent point, because again, like you touched on, very few people think about that. That's something that is, again, outside of the whole realm of this isn't even in my world. This isn't even a job I've really heard of before. So bringing awareness to that, and again, well, I would imagine that by having a professional come in and assess the situation, you're then set up, as you said, down the road for government assistance, financial aid, et cetera, because you have that professional, you have a professional analysis of the situation.
If I can add just one more thing, one thing that I saw people do in our community is they hired one person to do multiple homes, and that lowered the cost for some of just not having somebody have to pop around to different areas. They were able to negotiate contracts with the industrial hygienist or their firm to come and do the work of 10 houses instead of just 1 or 2 homes. And so residents need to get creative about pooling together their resources for things like that as well.
That's excellent point, because I would imagine that also expedites the process of getting your home looked at astronomically. Excellent. That's amazing. Very, very nice stuff. Thank you very much for those points, Jen. Now, all right. So this brings me to my next topic: the HEPA versus the HVAC. or cleaning out your air. I myself have a HEPA filter. I mean, you guys we've obviously talked on and I believe it's a 2.5 PM. I believe, is that correct? The 2.5. The HEPA filters are going to be huge for being able to start circulating this out of the air. So if you have a traditional fan, like how important is that HEPA certification?
Well,
Oh,
There we
I
go.
was going to
We'll
interject.
start with Renya and then we'll go into Michael.
Okay.
okay. So let's go to the HEPA. If you have an HVAC system, the recommendation is that one puts in place a MERV 13 or higher rating filter. MERV 13.
I'm just going to pause real fast. Can you explain actually even what HVAC versus HEPA is? I think I just take it even more because I think a lot of us, myself included, we see HEPA, but what is that exactly? That's sort of a vague term that a lot of us laymen's do not know.
Yeah, so let's see. HEPA stands for high efficiency filtration air system, or high efficiency particulate filtration system.
Aerosol. Yes, high
Aerosol
efficiency
system.
particulate aerosol.
Is that correct? We use it so much that I've also forgotten what it refers to. And it is known to filter, okay, help me out, you guys. How much percentage of particulate matter? It's like
99.97% particulates sub-micron in size. So that's 1 micron. The particulate matter of concern of the 2.5 that Dr. Sabita has been mentioning, that would be filtered by a HEPA filtration system.
Okay, excellent. So it has to be it can't just be, as we touched on earlier, it can't just be a vacuum. It has to be, the HEPA is a very particular grade of filtration.
It's a filtration efficiency measurement. It met a certain criteria to get very, very small particle sizes. That's what that means.
Excellent.
So
Thank you.
I'd like to add that not every filtration system, not every air conditioning and central air system that may exist in an office or a house might be able to take a HEPA filter. It places a lot of resistance in the ventilation system. And so what is more commonly used in these systems are MERV filters. And you could buy them. They're called MERV. They have ratings. And MERV 13 up to MERV 16 is available. And they're like a very pleated types of filters. They are commercially available. And the MERV 13 is really the lowest you want to go because that has its ultra efficiency in filtration because of the number of pleats that it has. And it's used in labs and hospitals, data centers, all these computers. And so the more increased the rating is, the more it's going to be able to filter. MERV 16 will be as far as you want to go without affecting the fans and putting too much pressure on them, and therefore burning the entire system down. And stopping, burning the fans. And so, we've seen it be used in schools where they are close to freeways. And, I've done research on that myself, and it really does take away most of the, in 97 to 99% of particulate matter, even ultrafine particles out of the air. And so that may be more available to folks to put in their home right now rather than a HEPA filter, which potentially has too much resistance. Which is, now that's different from the availability and the possibility of having a vacuum HEPA with a HEPA filter. I personally I have a family, and one of my family members was allergic to dust mites, to everything possible. And so I had a a vacuum that I bought somewhere, and I mean, it wasn't cheap, but it was a common one. And I bought HEPA bags to put in the vacuum so that whatever went in got stuck into that bag and never came out the other end.
Got you. And that's something that we as a society, or we as a public who's dealing with this, can do ourselves, a sort of do-it-yourself. We can all change out the filters for HEPA filters in a way to sort of start cleaning our own homes, to decontaminating our own homes.
Well,
Right.
not HEPA filters, but MERV filters.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the clarification there. Yeah, 'cause I
Yeah,
think
so just a quick further clarification. You know, HEPA filters, as Michael alluded to, is a rating of a filter efficiency. They go in respirators, they can go in vacuum cleaners, they can go in stuff that really you want to get a lot of dust out and a lot of fine particulate. But when you talk about heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or HVAC systems, which are inside people's homes and businesses and buildings, you know, HEPA filters are just too efficient. They block sufficient airflow. So you use MERV filters, which are, you know, more effective based on the number. So the higher the number of the MERV filter, the more efficient it's going to be at filtering out particulate. So as Rania mentioned, you know, a NERV 13, which was used during the COVID pandemic for a lot of commercial buildings, is good for getting those really small, dangerous particulates out, and still allow sufficient airflow to go through.
And now, is that are the MERV filters a fairly common, are they fairly common now in a lot of commercial establishments? I think.
Yeah, you can get them on Amazon.
And I think, yeah, I think we have the link that we'll actually put up in the talk. Thank you, Jen, for that. We'll actually put the links up so that way people who are watching can find an approved MERV filter that they could potentially utilize for their own home or office.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, MERV stands for Minimal Efficiency Reporting Value.
Oh, excellent.
And I want to add that a HEPA filter has the efficiency of a MERV 17 or higher. And so they're like, the terminology happens to be related to product availability, but really it's the same concept. So MERV, all HEPA filters have a rating of a MERV 17 or higher.
Excellent.
A HEPA filter with a MERV 17 or a MERV 17 will trap 99.97% of air particles that are very tiny, like 0.3 to 1 micron in size. And but HEPA filters, yeah, those place too much of a strain on a normal HVAC system.
Gotcha.
And are probably not commonly available. You might be able to put them in some more advanced system.
I love this. No, this is great. So this is the MERV filter is a great way for all of the people who are coming back, an initial first step to purifying and decontaminating their homes. I'm just gonna move into our next question. What are some other sort of DIY properties? And I know we've touched on these a little bit with the what are they? The chem sponges and whatnot. What are some of the other ways that we can start cleaning our own homes safely? So the MERV filter is a great way to start filtering the air, but as far as like for the wiping down, for the cleansing, is there something we can do? I'm a big, I grew up with you spray a little Windex on it, and that generally will clean anything. I know this is not slightly, this is a much different situation. What can we start doing that is approved for actual cleanup to get these residues off?
Yeah, it's really important to have a protocol developed based on what your situation is.
Okay.
And as we've mentioned here, the quick things, in summary that can occur for the homeowner to do themselves. Use a HEPA filtration rated vacuum cleaner, the portable vacuums. Change out their heating ventilation system, heating HVAC systems filter to a MERV 13 or greater. Okay, that's something. So when they turn on the system, it's actually filtering out those particles. Change the filtration system, change the filter out of your home that was there, which possibly cycled during the event while you were evacuated, because that's going to be pretty clogged up with particles at this time.
How often, on that note, how often do you guys, is it recommended that you would change, or is it, I know we've said it's very dependent on your situation, where you are in regards to these fires, but is there a ballpark of how often you want to be changing these?
Yeah, from a homeowner who has one of these systems, who has a high efficiency type filtration that's active on a day in day out basis, it could be as much as every month to change those filters out. They will see when they pull the filter out, and is it discolored? Is it bound with particles and so forth? So, but in a case like this, change it. Those are very inexpensive to change, relatively speaking, and put some new ones in. So when you do turn on your system, and it's blowing around the particles that are just going to be in your residence, that it's going to capture those and not just distribute them throughout your house.
So is it
Okay.
recommended then prior to people going actually and moving back into their homes, or is it recommended to get those filters in, get them running a day, maybe two, before you move your family back into the home to give
Yeah,
adequate time?
absolutely. That makes good common sense, and from a scientific standpoint, we would support that.
Okay,
Yes, because
beautiful.
while it's running with a new filter element in place, it is pulling and capturing those particles, and those are particles that you would not then be breathing. So it makes perfect sense.
Love
And
it.
then Joel, as you mentioned, then what you do next? HEPA vacuum all the surfaces in your house. Get the loose particles out. It would be to collect those. Use dry sponges on something that could have driven in those particles into the surfaces if you use wet methods. So after dry sponges, the wet methods would make sense. Now, wet methods would be something like buy a lot of microfiber cloths or disposable type cloth type wipes that you would wipe the surfaces of your walls and floors and furnishings with. And uh, if you were to buy a solution, what is typical, and John will support on this as well too, what's typical is the most environmentally friendly detergent type solution that you can find. Seventh generation is pretty good. Melaleuca makes very good enzyme type cleaners that are detergent based, that are relatively mild and environmentally friendly, that will also break down organically quickly. But what they'll do is they'll pick up some of these particles that settle. Some of the particles are very dry. Some of them are sort of semi volatile. They'll be oily, greasy, like the soot type particles. They're going to want to adhere to surfaces more readily than the ash, which is just a very fine carbonaceous type and inorganic material that has settled on surfaces. You don't want to drive them into porous surfaces. You want to pick them up and remove them. So wet methods with many rags or disposable wipes using a very environmentally friendly detergent type solution is appropriate. John, what type of solutions do you use when you clean up?
We have some
Yeah.
professional solutions. I don't know that I can't remember the exact name, but for something for the average homeowner, stuff like Simple Green and stuff works pretty good. Um, But you were talking earlier about the HEPA filters. I just want to add something to that. We want to make the living space inside our house safe. So like you said, get in there, get that filter replaced with that Marv 13, let it run on just the fan mode for, a day or two, and just keep that running. I live actually in a wildland interface, and we had the fire come right up to our back door several years ago on a fire. That's exactly what we did. We swapped out those filters. We ran that air filter for like the fan all day. We actually went and rented a air scrubber, which I would highly recommend. But if you don't have the money or the means, your HVAC system in the fan mode with that filter works really well. But you also need to close your windows. You're trying to keep the contaminants out of your house. So don't have those windows open. If you have windows that got some cracks, try and figure out a way to seal up your house, so you're not getting all those contaminants into your house. We talk about wiping down walls and stuff. And you mentioned, Michael, about the microfibers. Those work really good. But on textured walls, you'll be rubbing the microfiber across the wall, and you'll feel it get caught up on the wall. So actually, rags, just your ordinary rag works better for like on like textured walls. And then when you're doing the HEPA vacuum, You want to use a soft bristle brush. You don't want to be using these hard bristle brushes because that will actually could push that into the wall. So a soft bristle horsehair brush, again, you can find that on Amazon, are great tools to use to get your house clean before you bring your family and those young kids back into your house.
Yeah, really good point, because what we're doing here, we're trying to create a safe zone. As Jen mentioned earlier, you want to have that home environment that is safe. You can't control necessarily what's going on outside. That's going to change from day to day through the restoration, through the demolition, through all those processes. But create as safe an environment as you can for your family and your loved ones in your home at this time.
Doctor, I think I saw your hand. Yes.
I just want to add to all that is being said right now and say that folks really need to protect themselves as they do all of this that is being recommended. So cleaners could be irritating to folks. They could be even more aggressive than that and could penetrate through the skin and over time really cause harm to the body. So I would encourage people to read the caution label on these bottles. Follow them. Another higher level of protection is to look up this product on Google and look for the safety data sheet of it. And it will say what level of protection is needed, what harm could it cause? Because we're not talking here about a little bit of cleaning. That's a lot of cleaning, and the quantity will be a lot. People will be inhaling it and getting it on their skin. Some products get through the skin or will irritate the skin or even go into the skin. Other things we inhale. And so it's important, I think, that we protect our skin, but also that we ventilate, that we be in a place where we ventilate. And again, here we have to be careful how to ventilate because outdoor air is not necessarily safe, but you could expose yourself to a lot more than what is currently in the home contaminated by using products to clean. And so protecting oneself is important. Usually we say a ventilated, very well ventilated space. In this case, you want to be careful what air you're bringing in, right? So it's a little bit of a challenge. And maybe you'd want to hire a professional company to do it because you're actually putting out vapors in the home that are going to cause worse damage to yourself and the people involved. So I wanted to highlight self-protection because we tend to forget that when we care about our homes and family.
Absolutely. And
You
that's an
have a
excellent
great
point.
point. I'm sorry. You got to protect yourself. And like you said, we're talking about having a safe zone inside our house. But when we're cleaning, you're right. You don't want to be having breathing all those vapors from these harsh chemicals. And you got to read the label. You don't want to just start pouring chemicals and thinking stronger is better. That's not the case. And then once you're done, if you do apply a chemical for some reason, you got to rinse that and get that off your walls and your surfaces.
And while doing that, you want to make sure you're wearing nitrile gloves, safety glasses, keeping as much of your skin covered as possible. And that being said, if you're doing that for a long period of time, you can get fatigued as well. So make sure to take little breaks while you're cleaning, take little chunks at a time. Because again, it's about protecting yourself while you're doing these activities.
Absolutely. No, and these are all great points because I think, again, there's so much information out there for the public, and a lot of the people who aren't educated in this, we're sifting through trying to figure it out. And it's been one of those things where, for instance, I haven't opened my windows for almost 2 weeks now. In an effort to try to keep it clean, to try to keep out a lot of this particle. But at the same time, I've thought that same thing. At what point do I, as a guy who's trying to re-clean, when do I reopen? Is there a time that it is safe? And I know a lot of this, as we've said, is all particular to your independent positioning, how the plume of smoke is going. Is there a blanket idea or a general, we'll say, idea about how long we will need to remain in a very cautious position? And I'll just go to whoever wants to hop in on this first. Let's see. Doctor?
I could try, but then I hope that others will continue. We can hope and pray that it will rain. And if it does that, then the air will be washed out. And then if there are no more active fires going on, then whatever was in the air is pretty much gone. And so, then we have to worry about stormwater drains and the ocean and all of that, right? So that's a whole other concern, but that's not what we're exactly talking about. And so there's that. Another is time, right? So the longer the time passes, all the particles are going to settle, the gases and the vapors might be gone. However, things that have settled may continue to emit vapors. And also the furniture that's burning and things like that. Those vapors, that the organic vapors that people may be exposed to might not go away necessarily. Again, it depends on the damage of the home and what are we talking about. So I'll let others chime in if they have any. I know it can it can travel miles, but eventually it'll stop. Okay, I'll let people chime in on that.
And it sounds like we're talking, again, we want the winds to move away these gas vapors, but at the same time, that also brings us to another particle matter, correct?
Well,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
Go
and
ahead.
in addition to that natural nature removing these particles out of the air, that is going to happen outside. But what we have to remember as well too is what has come into the home and has settled in the home, that is not going to go away unless there's a mechanism to remove it. And that mechanism is going to be through cleaning, whether the homeowner does it themselves or they hire a contractor to do it. They don't just naturally degrade by themselves. The vast majority of them do not, because they're particles, and so they've settled. They need to be removed. Otherwise, there's the potential for them to become re-airborne as the person just naturally lives in their home doing what they do, whether it's settled on drapes or on mini blinds. And then when those mini blinds are moved or altered or shaken, they will re-energize those to become airborne again.
And that could be days, weeks, months down the line, correct?
Right, exactly. And that's primarily within the living space, but let's also not neglect to, think about our attic spaces as well too. What has accumulated in the attic space, which is not designed for human occupancy, but there are attic vents by building codes where because of the pressure differentials and the wind that was driving this smoke and these particles during this wildfire will have likely pushed many particles into those type of spaces, whether it's a crawl space, there's an attic space, or at the interior wall cavities as well too. To a much lesser degree, typically, than in your living space, which through penetrations and so forth. But these are areas to consider as well too. The person, the homeowner or the property owner, business owner would need to ask themselves, what was the accumulation in these areas as well too. Those areas should be assessed if sampling is going to be performed. Sampling should be performed in those spaces as well too to determine if there's a problem there and if that problem warrants cleanup and removal.
Amazing, excellent, great points.
Can
Now,
I add something, Joel?
yes, absolutely, Jim, please.
For the attic specifically, a lot of the folks in our community, when we went in the attic, there were embers from the fire, which was miraculous that those homes didn't also catch fire. But the insulation for mine specifically was kind of like singed. It was just like sad looking, right? So it had been damaged from the heat and whatever had come, into the space. And so most of those for the smoke damage homes had to be replaced. So just something to keep in mind. But I do want to speak to, you asked about opening windows and the time. So it's been declared a federal disaster. So FEMA's going to come and do the debris cleanup. And the process for that is the county will have to put out an RFP to companies to bid on the project. And that will take a few months if you're lucky. And once that contractor is selected, they will start in whatever manner, whether it's neighborhoods or grid-like. The scale is huge, so I just really, we the collective communities that have been through fires think it's going to be probably 9 months before debris is cleaned, and that's going to be whether that's the start of the process or not. But just to give you kind of a sense of like, it's going to take a while before they clean this debris up. And so depending on how long it takes, they will come and spray an overlay over the debris to keep everything down. And
interesting.
we noticed in our community, it was like bright green color. So they like sprayed all the, all the lots that have the, the debris on them. They covered it with this stuff that's intended to kind of be a blanket and hold down ash and debris and the toxins from stirring up in winds. And so I imagine because of the length it's going to take for cleanup, that will be happening. And that is a huge relief for people that are in the standing homes around the area that are just trying to exist in their space while all of this kind of carnage is still here. And so you should see some improvements in just whether it's, perceived or real, but I think you'll see some improvements just in the air quality or the fears people have of, when it's windy or something's happening and they're very adjacent to those lots. So, and most people don't know that that's the process for it happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea, and that's a very real concern because I'm an active guy. I like to be outdoors like many Angelinos. We pay a lot of money to live in a place that we can be outdoors almost year round. And so that's a big issue. That's really interesting because I had no idea that they would come in and sort of lay, a blanket to try to mitigate further dust, because, I think the realist looks at the amount of damage and devastation that we have here. And this is unprecedented, I believe, in California's history. I think we hit this as the biggest wildfire in California history. This is incredible, and for guys like me who have seen, who are adjacent to this and have had ash raining down on them for 10 days or so, it's affected my well-being. It's affected my mental well-being because I find myself wanting to do stuff. But again, you're being bombarded by your phone and the news being like, don't go outside. Limit your, to the point where I'm like, I'm rushing my dog to use the restroom. I'm like, come on, Lana, you gotta go quick, and trying to fit a K, and I'm trying to patent this, the K9B5 mask for the dog. I know, good luck. Yeah, no, too soon. But these are all things, that moving forward, we Los Angelinos, that's stuff that a lot of us don't know. And that does sort of, and I've dealt with FEMA again, being a Floridian, we deal with FEMA a lot, and that way
they're better at this. Like they're better at this than each fire has they've improved. So I hope for better things than probably what you experienced in Florida.
Yeah, Florida was about an 18-month till we started getting any sort of progress. This, again, that's so encouraging to know for a lot of us Angelinos to know that once they come in, there are steps that we can get back to a level of normalcy in the area, and at least being outside, at least feeling like I don't have to wear my N95 outside when I walk the dog or when I'm, just going to run errands or whatnot.
Joel?
Yes, Doctor.
May I please, I'm just burning to add something here. May I? Okay, so what I want to add to this is, and Jen, please correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding and what I have heard is that ash is considered to be hazardous wastes. And so therefore, we have a rule, DTSC, Department of Toxic Substances Control, which is under Cal EPA. It's Rule 1466. And they have a rule for handling particulate emissions from soils with toxic air pollutants, and that includes ash too. And so just to say it's no joke, and that people shouldn't, for example, be thinking about vacuuming the outside of just be careful. That ash outside is actually hazardous waste at this point. And it will be handled and it will take time because, we've got agencies that have to talk to each other to coordinate the cleanup of it. And the other thing I want to say, we've been talking so much about, what do we do to clean up inside? And we talked about keep the windows and the doors closed if you're running your system. What I also want to say is we have to be careful and not bring in with us every time we walk in and out of the house, things on our shoes, and our clothes. So depending on what it is that we're doing, the clothes may not be much of an issue, but the shoes definitely is. And so if you walk outside through a contaminated area, although it's not really, your home is not exactly burned, you're tracking that ash, those residues that are outside into your home. So it's important. Same with your pet. They're bringing it in too when you take your dog for a walk, Joel. And so what do? You know, you got to clean the shoes, the bottom of them with something wet, maybe with wet wipes.
Yep.
I don't want to promote disposable products, and I'm not, you know, being an environmental scientist, I don't want to do that. But with COVID, we had to do that for sure. So here you want to worry about what you bring in the home, the feet of your pet, the paws of your pets, and your shoes. And it's always a great idea to actually never bring our shoes inside the home. It has never been more necessary than this. So be careful. And depending on what you've done outside and how dusty the area was, maybe you remove your clothes too, you know, but you know, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I would just say maybe for sure shoes. Just wanted to bring that up.
Great point. And Michael, I know you touched on that earlier. Wearing, if you're going to be putting yourself in a situation where you will be around ash, whatnot, wearing long sleeve shirts, covering yourself. You know, I've seen many studies on this shoe-free household. So I'm a big advocate of the shoe-free household already, because I think that is a huge thing. I've seen a lot of things in my time in LA. I don't want these streets touching my household, you know. So
Right.
never before has that been more accurate than we are right now in the Los Angeles community. We're constantly being bombarded with ash, with you know, and that's just what you can see. As we've said, you know, there's a number of non-visible substances that are constantly falling currently. So
Yeah.
wiping the dog's feet, wiping, you know, removing your shoes. If you're in an area that you're surrounded by ash or going to be working near that, obvious long sleeve shirts is hats, I would imagine. And Michael, you said the goggles to protect the eyes as well. So important. Let me see.
Yeah, all just good common sense things to do. It's just what we're trying to do is expand everyone's awareness that you may not have considered the bottom of your shoes and what you're tracking in with you. Good points. We need to look at that. So yes, what's coming in on your person, what is you're surrounded by in your environment, and how to just sort of minimize that from a prudent, practical standpoint. And these are simple things like removing your shoes when you come into your house. Makes perfect sense. When you rebuild, maybe not have as many carpets. Throw carpets. Yeah, that's fine. We need to have, warm floors for us to sit on. But hardwood floors and the harder type floors, they're easier to clean. They don't accumulate debris and so forth. And as you'll see here, where the debris has landed uh, should be cleaned, should be mitigated. Those surfaces should remove the soot, the char, the ash, any of the deposits from the smoke, because as the doctor pointed out, ash is considered a hazardous material.
Now, on that note, Michael, and I thank you for segueing so perfectly. I couldn't have done it better. So let's say we go in and our child has a teddy bear, and our kids' stuffed animals or toys. How can parents be aware? And I know we've touched on it, briefly with the dry cloths and the HEPA filters and the MERV filters for your home and office. What are some other ways that besides, would it be utilizing Simple Green and those vacuums that John was mentioning to clean toys, or how do parents go about delving that whole new?
Yeah, the toys is just a perfect example. Let's say just a teddy bear that your child's favorite teddy bear, and you finally get access to your home and you want to go back in and you want to get that. Things. How about this? Things to consider. Number one, is that toy really that important? If there's ash surrounding it, if there's ash on it, do visual inspection. If it's discolored and so forth, it's going to have been impacted by those particles that have settled on it. If you smell it, as a parent, and it smells smoky, that's another indication, that wow, if at all possible, do not have that. It's a very porous material, and it's covered with all types of synthetic and organic type, coverings and so forth. That's going to adhere to these particles. If it's something that you just can't live without, if it's a hard surface, yes, readily cleaned, with just environmentally friendly, non-toxic type of detergent wipes, do that. But a teddy bear, which is very porous, multiple surface, fabric type surfaces, ask yourself, do you really need to have that? And yeah, the indicators, is it visibly contaminated? Does it have a smell to it? Launder it. Other questions would be, what about my clothes? What about all my t-shirts and socks and everything? Typically laundering does a pretty good job. Use warm water when you do this. Once again, environmentally friendly detergents that will break down, these accumulated particles that either settled on or adhered to these substances. So the general rule of thumb is that most type of furnishings and personal wearable items can be laundered, and if they can be, do so. One time, sure, maybe even twice, and then inspect them and then smell them afterwards, after it's gone through the process. And I never encourage people to use like dry or clean sheets that have an odor to them. Use the odor-free ones, so that way you can really tell, has this been impacted by smoke? And if you can't get it out through a couple of launderings, consider disposing of it.
Excellent. No, that's a great point. Yeah, and I was just going to bring up, not everybody has kids, but a lot of people have clothes, and that's something that, moving
Yeah.
back in, a lot of people are going to need to be aware of, and washing, the smell test. And I think we've touched what I love, and again, you guys have done such a phenomenal job of emphasizing certain points. A lot of this common sense stuff, the smell test, the visual, a visual assessment of the situation, combining that with HEPA filters, MERV filters, environmentally safe detergents, and it's all things that I think a lot of people, again, going back, Jen, I think that term fire brain, I think that's so it. That, a lot of people don't think of this now, and they want to get back to their usual thing, but doing it the proper way is going to save them both health and financial hardship, I would imagine, down the line in a multitude of different ways. Let's see. Now, and I'll bring one more question up. You guys, everybody, thank you so much. You guys have been phenomenal. Now, one of the things that moving forward, it'll be finding contractors to come in and not only clean or test their homes, but coming in and finding actual contractors who can do the job of pulling these things away. What are some of the tips that homeowners and parents can use in finding a contractor that is certified in these ways? What are some of the questions they need to ask their contractor moving forward for the next steps? And we'll go with whoever wants to jump on that one. Anyone? John?
Yeah, let me add. So I think one thing I just want to say what to avoid is finding a contractor that's going to come in and they just take care of the odors. You could buy a special product like Odor X and these different odor eating type of chemicals, and they could fog it and it makes it smell better. But really, you got to remove the contaminants. So you got to understand what their process is. And really, like, we talked earlier, are they doing the proper testing of soot, ash, and char testing? Do you have a certified industrial hygienist involved that's creating a work plan? Those contractors are the professional contractors. These guys that come in that, oh, I'll take care of this, and they're just going to fog and remove the smell, the toxins are still there. So I guess that's more my word of caution, what you're looking for. And you definitely want a contractor that works with certified industrial hygienists, whether they use them for your property, but at least they've been trained and they know the hazards that are involved with all this soot that's in the house.
Is there a specific certification that a contractor can go through, or is it just their relationship with a cosmetic? What is the term again? It's cosmetic. For the person who can come in and do the assessment.
Michael, maybe you could answer more on that on the certifications part of it, but
Yeah,
And then real fast, while I do have you, John, I do, because I know you have a background again in dealing with these toxins. So I know we've talked a lot about the toxins and the melted plastics and whatnot. We touched briefly on it earlier, asbestos. Los Angeles is full of buildings that are just packed full of asbestos. As that burns, now I'm from my understanding, asbestos are slivers that are floating in the air, right? So they are not an odor, they're not a specific a particular particle, but it's like a sliver of material. Is that accurate?
So asbestos is a mineral fiber and it's
Thank you, Rob.
fireproof. And the problem with asbestos is it's very resilient to being degraded by anything. So once these fibers get in the air, they stay there for a long time. And if you breathe them, they impact in the interior of your lung and can cause fibrotic disease. So, but getting kind of back to certification and stuff, there's if you look at the process, there's two ways to approach it. One is to get a consultant to come in first and do an assessment, and that will help you kind of dial in the degree of remediation that you need. If you want to go straight to the contractor, because you don't, for some reason a consultant's not available or you don't want to go that route, at least ask the contractor to submit to you a work plan and tell all the exact steps that you're going to do. And in that work plan, he or she should be able to detail, how they're going to do the cleaning, where they're going to do, what materials they're going to bring in and use, and how they're going to protect both themselves who are doing the work and you, the homeowner or business owner, from being exposed to any of this while it's going on. So again, it kind of gets back to looking at the process as a whole. Before you bring anyone in to do cleaning and spend money doing that, perhaps having an assessment done first so you can determine what exactly you need to put in place. I should also add the other advantage of having a consultant come in and do an evaluation is, as Jen pointed out, at some point, you may come out of pocket on it, you may get some federal funding, or you might go through your insurance company. If there's any questions as to whether it's needed or not, you have a third party professional evaluating it, which gives you a lot more ammunition if you're having a conflict with your insurance company.
Absolutely. Great. Excellent point there. Excellent.
Yeah, and if I could add, you guys, specific to the question of the certifications for this, that's a good one. There are no regulatory-driven certification requirements for a contractor to do fire damage work. Now, they need to be a California state certified contractor, yes. Hopefully they have a hazmat endorsement as well, but there's nothing specific to fire cleanup that is required by regulatory agencies currently.
Interesting.
There
They
is
do.
one thing, if
Oh.
they are cleaning up hazardous waste, then they do need to have certain types of insurance and training. Cal OSHA basically has what's called the HAZWOPER standard. It stands for Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response. It's a mandatory 40-hour class, so anyone cleaning up hazardous waste should have that HAZWOPER training, and that training will cover the gamut of, how to protect people, how to decontaminate, what sort of personal protective equipment that you need. So that might be one indicator that you're looking for, especially with really messy cleanups, when selecting a contractor.
Excellent.
Right,
No,
and that will apply for the people who remove the waste of the debris of the homes. There will be certification requirements for those people to do that. But just for people to come in and clean up soot, char, and ash residues, nothing specific for that activity. However, there are parallel requirements, as Rob mentioned, the HAZWOPER certification, which would be applicable, but not a requirement specifically for that work.
but those are things that again, as people move back in, they can be looking for and be
Yes.
aware, because that will add
Absolutely.
that level of protection, that they will be getting exactly what they need, as opposed to just somebody coming in doing an odor neutralization and like a gutting or whatnot, right?
Absolutely. You're right. That type of a vetting process is important to see. Well, ask them as a property owner, as a homeowner, ask what type of certifications they do have, and make sure that you're comfortable with those and Google those. Do some investigation as to what that actually means. Is it something that's just very readily available that they just need to pay a fee to get, or is it something that they need to take training courses specific to minimization of risk and dealing with hazards? That would be more appropriate.
Absolutely.
I wanted to add two things to that. We had a restoration company come in and do what we thought all the right things were. And when we realized that we had paid $35,000 to a restoration company to do things that didn't fix the problem in our house, I was informed that the contract states that they will wipe down everything and pointed to that. And so what it taught me was, if you're going to hire somebody and they have a contract, look at the contract to see what it is exactly that they're going to provide in terms of qualifying, like, we've done the job, right? And for them, it was, we wiped everything down. We've got no, and a second thing, for people that are insured, the insurance company is not your friend, right? They're going to be very happy with sending in a restoration company for $35,000, which would ultimately cost for our 2,000 square foot house almost $200,000 to clean up. So they didn't want us to get the industrial hygienist report. They were very happy if we just had somebody wipe things down. And so folks might actually have to advocate a little harder for themselves with their insurance companies that they want the industrial hygienist report. And I recommend people get it in writing, that they get the report before the cleanup and a report after the cleanup that shows everything's done. And insurance companies tend to want to just avoid that conversation as much as possible. And so people need to directly ask for it. And they're not going to suggest, typically they're not going to suggest that that's the best way to do it, even though that's the best way to do it.
No, and that I think is so huge for people going back into their homes. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, because that was the term that I was trying to think, industrial hygienist earlier. But yeah, that's you're absolutely right. Insurance companies they don't want to pony up anything. They want you to go bare minimum. They don't want to have to deal with that. So, and this is something that I think a lot of people, they're just ignorant on the fact of where their rights are and what they need to be doing. Because, unless you've been through this, unless you're an advocate like Jen, like you've seen many times, you're dealing with you have an ignorant blanket. And again, I'm going to keep using this term, firehead. You're not thinking about, like, what do I need to do next properly? You're just thinking, I need to get my kid back into school. I need to, my job. I still got a mortgage on this house that may or may not be, damaged or whatnot. So having the foresight to have an industrial hygienist come in, especially for those of us watching who do have fire insurance, I think that's such an important thing that again, I think I don't think it's common knowledge for society that job even exists. So having that information for people, and maybe what we can do is maybe on the bottom when we post this chat, this forum, we can post potentially links to industrial hygienists who we've worked with, who we can count on. Because I think, again, a lot of people, if they're watching this for the first time, like myself, I'd be like, man, where do I find an industrial hygienist? And first thing you're going to do is Google. But Google can be tricky, we'll say. Just because you Google it doesn't mean it's going to come up right. Rob?
Joel, let me add that, there's a couple of professional organizations of, certified industrial hygienists. We have 3 industrial hygienists on this call, by the way, myself, Rania, and Michael. The American Industrial Hygiene Association is a good place to start. It has a searchable website where if you need a consultant, you can click on that. You could put in your state, your area code, zip code, and it'll give you a list of the industrial hygiene consulting firms in your area.
Incredible.
It used to be the American Board of Industrial Hygiene. It has now changed to the Board for Global EHS accreditation. They also maintain a list of certified industrial hygienists in your area that do consulting work. So, Industrial hygienists, by what we do, like lawyers, like doctors, we have to have a certain amount of continuing education. So as long as an industrial hygienist is certified, it's kind of a quality issue that, these people know what they're doing in their practices.
And now, are the services of an industrial hygienist generally covered by fire insurance or by home insurance, or no?
I couldn't tell you.
It
Okay.
depends. It depends on the policy. And what I've seen when it isn't explicitly covered or an insurance company says no, get it done anyway and then submit it for reimbursement because they're going to find stuff and the insurance won't be able to deny it.
Love that.
You have to be a little forceful with them.
Yeah,
That's-
it's a higher standard of care is what it is, and the certification carries an incredible amount of weight associated with it with respect to insurance companies. Yeah, and correct, the insurance companies don't want to necessarily open up that can of worms, and you must be your biggest advocate in order to ask for it. But first, you need to know what the question is to ask, and that is to ask for someone who's certified. Ask for a certified industrial hygienist to perform this type of an assessment because it carries that level of care, which is the highest standard in the United States and the world, actually.
And that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want for our families, our loved ones. We don't want to put them in a situation where unknowingly will down the line they'll develop some sort of respiratory, a health issue, a lead. There's so many things going through the air right now that I think, knowledge of this profession, because again, I myself had no idea. I think that that's so important for the public to know about and to know that that option should be taken from each of them. Let's see. Yes, and especially down the line as well, as you progress, as you want to sell these homes, which a lot of California, I'm sure a lot of Brentwood and Palisades are going to be doing soon. They're going to be wanting to get rid of these homes. Having this assessment will, I'm assuming, assist in this sale as well, saying I can guarantee I had a third-party industrial hygienist come out. They verified that this is toxin free or toxin that we're clear. I would imagine that will assist furthering and selling of these properties as well, correct?
It is a disclosable item in any real estate transaction that any damage, any physical damage, chemical damage, hazardous material damage, uh, like this will have to be disclosed through the property transaction. And having the reports that are associated with it, that evaluated it, that there was a cleanup done, and then it was verified, that will carry a lot of weight when the transaction occurs. Yes.
Wow.
I'm a realtor, and in our community, when people started to buy homes that were affected by the fire, anybody that I took, if they were looking at a house and they couldn't show the proper remediation, I would advise them not to buy the property.
Wow. So there it is right there. For anyone watching this in the California, Los Angeles area, for those of you who plan on selling your homes or your properties, then this is a way to facilitate that sale goes through smoothly and efficiently for everyone watching. So let's see. Well, guys, this has just been a wealth of information. I think there's been so much, and again, thank you for the clarity and what you all have brought to the table and the information you all have provided. I speak for myself and many other Angelinos when we're just trying to navigate these tumultuous tides of information, because as we see every day, we get bombarded with another wave of media, we'll say, and that's a challenge to try to navigate through the media and determine what is actually what we should be aware of, and knowing that again, what you can't see can also still hurt you. Being aware that there's a lot of chemicals, there's a lot of toxins and pollutants currently going into the air. I did want to go back real fast. The asbestos thing, Michael, maybe, and you might, thankfully, you're already pinned here. You might be for cleaning. items that you feel might have been coated with asbestos. I don't know the proper term,
No, that's okay, Joel. Yeah, asbestos may be one of the contaminants of concern, that have deposited within your residence, and it's easily tested for as part of the overall assessment. It would be a simple wipe sample type method that the laboratory would analyze to determine if some of those residues in your home do also contain asbestos. As Rob mentioned earlier, asbestos is an inorganic fiber. And so it is readily becomes airborne, travels through the air. It would be a part of the smoke plume. As buildings are being burned, any building that's older than 1978 or so will have likely asbestos-containing materials within it. And as those combust and as those burn, those materials will become airborne and will travel with the smoke. So very easy to do. That could be and really should be a part of an overall assessment of the residence to determine if not only asbestos is present with the soot, the char, the ash, and soot, char, and ash are the three major components of combustion that are evaluated by any smoke assessment. To add asbestos and lead would also make perfect sense too, to determine, even if with just a few minimal samples, is that part of the profile within the home residence that you should be concerned with. The good news is that it's readily cleaned and mitigated through general processes that are very similar to the ones that remove the soot, char, and the ash or the smoke residues. So it's not like an entirely different type of mitigation. It's just it goes with the overall the mixture, which is going to be removed. So
Excellent.
yes, it should be tested before. It should be addressed and identified and then handled by the mitigating contractor and then verified at the very end that it had been removed to an acceptable level.
Excellent. And a
Joel,
way now,
if I can add something to what Michael just said,
please.
because lead and asbestos are inherent in certain building materials, especially of older buildings, I think moving forward, it's going to be a concern as they demolish some of these structures that are beyond repair of the
Sure.
people living next door or downwind, because, it's important that even with a demolished structure that's going to be demolished, to test for these materials so they don't travel as part of the demolition process to the surrounding neighbors.
So
So
you're
that's
not reintroducing them into the airways.
Right.
exactly. So this is not something that's going to be an immediate concern, but months from now, as people start tearing down burnt structures and rebuilding, something to think about.
Yeah, and all demolition permits in the state of California are requiring an asbestos survey as well as a lead-based paint survey as well too. So that's going to be part of the contractor's requirement to actually get the job for the demolition. They need to evaluate whether these particular sites do contain the heavy metals, including lead, and also the asbestos-containing materials as well too. That's part of their permit.
And
Excellent.
I'd like to add something here in that part of folks being allowed to do, to remove asbestos or lead has also a lot to do with protecting the workers who are doing the work themselves, not just the community around them. And I'm an industrial hygienist, right? And so I feel like it is my responsibility to say that we need to be advocates for cleanup workers or contractors to be protected on the job everywhere we can. And, if folks are trained properly, hopefully they'll implement these measures, but that we advocate for that would be very helpful to be safe on the job when they enter a home and are cleaning dust or anything that resuspends the material, or when they remove insulation, for example. Insulation material, has a lot of fiberglass in it, and that could be very irritating to the skin for sure and the respiratory system, and they should be protected. So you really want to be careful who you personally hire to do the cleanup, and as Michael and Rob were just saying, be careful about their certification, particularly with asbestos and lead removal, but also be mindful that they need to be protected, not just, the household folks and the neighbors.
Absolutely. And that's great. I think a lot of people take that, especially the workers take that for granted. They don't even think about that. I see that at a lot of times with construction, even around our neighborhood. They've been out since the fires have began, and they're out working with no masks, no nothing. I've often wondered, I'm like, that can't be safe. That can't be safe. But, and that's something that's really important that I think they need to be, and, as we watch our contractors as well, maybe we pose that question to them, what safety protocols are they putting in play for their employees as well? Real fast, I have one question on the asbestos. I know I keep going back to this one. The HEPA filters, do they accurately? They do. Okay. HEPA MERV filters will accurately pick up the fiber or the asbestos fibers.
HEPA, yes. MERV, maybe, probably not.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so again, for your HEPA filters, get your HEPA filters in your house, and I'm just going to blanket statement. I'm assuming you guys all recommend a lot of Angelenos right now be running as many HEPA filters in their house as possible. Is that accurate, or is that a concern for us?
Again,
Generally speaking, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
Yeah, generally speaking, yes, because when they're running HEPA filtration, they're actively removing those particles from the air. There's limitations to them, how many you're using, where they're located, and so forth, what you're doing. But yes, if you can, in your living space, run the air purifying system that has HEPA filtration. That could only remove more particles that would normally be getting into your lungs.
Love that.
And then put a MERV filter into your HVAC system that may not get as many particles, but it'll get some, especially
The multiple layers of protection is going to be key, I think, right? Because as we've said many times, each example or situation is its own sort of bubble. What air they're breathing, where they're going, how close they are to fires.
Right,
Yeah.
but it also looks at the process as a whole. So maybe leave your shoes at the front door, not bring them in so you're not bringing more stuff into your house. Wipe down the things you're comfortable wiping down. Use HEPA filtration air purifiers. Put in a MERV filter. When in doubt, put on an N95 while you're doing the cleaning process. So it looks at the whole process as opposed to one or two things you can do. And some things are going to be more important than others depending on the situation.
Yeah, excellent.
I'd like to say something about air purifiers, and then I'm going to pop up a slides. You can tell that my background is pretty academic. I feel like I create slides as we're talking to be able to be visual, just because that's like a go-to for me. But I prepared this for folks in case they're watching us. Again, HVAC system equipped with filter, MERV 13. Up to 16, and just like Rob said, the higher the MERV number, the more able it will be to capture everything. You may also need or want to bring in an activated carbon adsorbing material into the system, so that you could reduce VOC levels indoors, particularly if cleaning is happening actually. So that, you don't want more VOCs coming in. And if there is any, you want it to be filtered out. So I do want to say something about indoor air purifiers, because it was mentioned just now. A few things about them that people need to know before they jump into buying an air purifier. First, it needs to be large enough to provide enough air for the size of the room and the number of occupants in it. And a very important one, and I colored it. Oops, sorry, my mouse has a life of its own. Okay, and then it must be certified by CARB to avoid having a purifier that actually will produce harmful gases such as ozone and throwing that into your space. And, that is definitely, it's actually a criteria pollutant, and you don't want ozone. It's very damaging to the lungs. And so at the bottom of the slide, and I could throw that in the chat, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, has a list of certified air cleaning devices that they've certified are adequate and are not polluting themselves. And just like we talked about, filters in your HVAC system, that, if it's a MERV, maintain them, regularly, but just also be mindful of the fact that if depending on what it is you're filtering, are you filtering the air inside then, or are you filtering the air from outside? But keep in mind that for air to be circulated and cleaned up properly, whether it's by a purifier or by your HVAC system, that the windows and the doors to the outside are closed, so would be helpful so that most of all the air in the room gets a chance to be processed by this purifier, and to minimize entry of additional pollutants than what's being produced throughout the cleanup process. And also, you know, people have asked, where should I place the air purifier? You know, where you have folks that are vulnerable, you know, their vulnerability is different for different people. If you're worried about your child, then you put your air purifier next to them while they're sleeping. If, you know, it depends on where the vulnerable person is, you put the air purifier closer to them because that's going to move the air quicker and sooner around them. I want to say sooner. Eventually the whole room will be cleaned up to some degree if it's big enough. So just wanted to put that out there for folks.
No, that's excellent. Yes, and again, maintaining that it is a CARB certified air cleaner, I think is huge, because I think a lot of people are going to go to Amazon. They're just going to type in air purifier and they're just going to go for it. So having an idea of what your air purifier can actually do, I think is very helpful for a lot of people, you know, who are just going to be going, it's sort of knee-jerk reaction. I need a purifier. What do I do? I'm just going to grab one and that'll fix everything. I love the idea about the activated charcoal as well, because again, as we've said multiple times on this call, there's a lot of things that not only you can see, but also you can't see that are going to be affecting you. So, Doctor, thank you so much. Everyone, again, you've all, this is a wealth of information. I cannot express my gratitude enough. As Angelino, who's currently dealing with this, you know, I've fielded a lot of these questions to Michael, and I've been utilizing him as a resource. I'm like, how do I stay healthy? How do I protect my family? What do I do? You know, and because these are all questions that are going through, I think, a lot of our heads here, you know, and unfortunately, with there being so much information currently, you know, in the atmosphere or in the inner space, it becomes difficult to cut through the fat to get to the heart of the matter. And I'm very grateful that I think we've been able to do that. We've been able to bring very accurate, very legitimate answers for people moving forward. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for your time today. This has been incredibly valuable. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if there's anything else you'd like to discuss before we move forward.
No, thanks very much. Jen did express her gratitude for this as well too. She had to go to another meeting, so she says goodbye to everybody and thank you. So and thank you, Joel, for moderating this.
No, you guys again, phenomenal. Thank you to Kevin, Rob, Dr. John. You guys are again incredibly valuable. We really appreciate your expertise and information in this matter. I personally, I'm like, man, my mind is blown. I've got tons of notes here that I'm like, okay, I know now where I got to at least start with.
Yeah.
So thank you for giving us at least a foundation that we can build accurate information on.
Yeah, let's spread the word.
And for those of you watching at home, we will have resources, websites put in the topic or in the subject of the YouTube video. We'll have some things like your CARB certification. We will get into the American Industrial Hygienist Association, so that way if you are affected by these fires, you can look up and actually find a licensed and certified industrial hygienist to come in. And again, I think that anyone watching this who is dealing with these fire damages should do that for your own health, for the safety of your family and your loved ones. I mean, it's obviously incredibly valuable to have that information and to protect the people involved. That said, again, thank you so much, everyone. You guys, it's been truly a pleasure to get a chance to speak with you, and thank you for your time.
Joel, thank you. Thank you, everyone. And
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
good luck and be safe.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
y'all.
Thank you.